see through you, see your true colors.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And you know, we've got those new unsealed reports, forensic reports, about 2,300 pages of them. And, you know, I've been staring at these things for a couple of days now. And of course, I can't get very far into them because trying to go through, I'm tired of going through and not knowing what the heck I'm looking at. So I took all the exhibits, went through everything I could find to identify each one so that I know as I go through there, I've got to be able to fill in the blanks on the things, and I've been able to do that. And it really paints a better picture when you can do that. You know what they're talking about as far as, you know, whose prints are these and whose DNA buccal swabs are these. So I've been doing that, and I'm going to take my time getting through that. But in this one, I just want to point out some things because there's some questions that can be answered in this video that we've all had for quite some time. Some of us have debated some of this stuff back in the old days. So we're going to talk about that knife sheath. Now, I always knew they had the knife sheath. I know people didn't believe that they even had pictures of it. When you look in the Frank's motion that Ann Taylor filed, one of the things that she listed as an exhibit was Nunez's body cam of the knife sheath, and she was questioning things around it. So we knew that the knife sheath was there at some point, but figuring out what happened, how it got there, and what happened after that was a whole nother ball game. Well, I'm going to show you some things in this one that make the story about them finding Brian Kohberger through genetic genealogy, matching up his DNA sample, blows that completely out of the water in the amount of DNA they had, the chain of custody of the sheath, the DNA sample, the solution. I mean, it's got it all in there for us to pick apart, and it's exactly what we're about to do. So let's pick that stuff apart. Ridiculous. Okay, so when we go to this knife sheath, I'm going to start on this report right here. And this is logging of evidence. So the date of the offense is 11/13. This came into evidence at the lab on 11/16. The analyst is Stephanie Wilt. It's kind of important to start remembering who these analysts are, because as we go through chain of custody, I'm going to show you the ones that actually partook in this thing and the difference between them and the evidence storage people and the dates around the things that are really paint a picture of this case and what's really going on. But when we get to the description, we've got item 1 is the K-bar knife. So anytime you see 1, whether it's 1, 1.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, anything 1 is going to be the K-bar sheath. So, and you can see here, they're talking about 4 different swabs. 1.1, that's the strap where they say they got the touch DNA that got BK. 1.2 handles portion, edges of the blade portion. When it says the blade portion, it's talking about the strap, not a knife. And then 1.4 is the stains on the back that tested positive for blood. And you can see here there include conclusions and interpretations. Results from presumptive chemical tests performed on item 1 indicated the presence of blood. So they first test it to see if it has blood on it. It does show a presence of blood, so they're going to test it further. Item 1 was swabbed for DNA collection. Trace evidence was collected but was not examined at this time. So it's important to note little things like this, because when we go to chain of custody, that has to match up perfect. They took known reference samples from Maddie, Xana, Ethan, and Kaylee and used those for the comparisons, and I'll show you some really wild stuff about that. Any known reference sample from any developed suspect is required for comparisons. And then that talks about the disposition of the evidence. And 1.1, 2, 3, and 4 were forwarded for DNA analysis. Results will follow in a separate report. But what we're going to do is go through here, and I'm going to show you some things about this knife sheath and some things that'll tell you that this is some BS, y'all. All right, so on 11/17, Stephanie Wilt is busting the tape on the package, and she's going through it. She uses a bright light to examine white residue, OBS white residue on and near the threads, dark areas of discoloration in material, and very small red-brown stains on the back. And note, the back is designated as side B in the photos. She tested 4 total stains on the back. So all of them on the back of the knife sheath, all equals 0 toll pos. 0 toll, that means a test for, is it positive for blood? And yes, all 4 of the little stains on the back of the sheath were tested positive for blood. Now, the difference in the stains is she used 1 swab to swab the front strap. Item 1.1, that's the touch DNA that sent BK to prison for the rest of his life. So she used 1 swab to swab the front strap with a light gray transfer swab, and it was consumptive. So that means you're not going to swab anything else off of that knife sheath on the front strap. Her 1 swab she used consumed everything. She used 1 swab on the edges of the handle portion, and that was light brown transfer to swab. She consumed that, and she tried to avoid the red-brown stain. She used 1 swab to swab the edges of the blade portion. 1.3, light brown transfer to swab. She consumed all of that. Used 2 swabs to swab the old toll, 0 toll pos, to swab the areas on the back that actually had the blood stains. And that's item 1.1 is what she's referring to as those 2 swabs. And that was light red-brown transfer concentrated on tips, and it was consumptive. Note, all stains collected. So the 4 swabs, basically she used to swab the entire portions of the knife sheath, consumed everything. So you're not taking this knife sheath after she did this and getting any kind of evidence off of it, because she's put in here that it was consumptive on every one of those strikes. That is huge right there, as I'm going to show you here in a little bit. 0 toll pos, though, that's for all the stains on the back of it. And then she goes through and talks about how she cut the stuff out. But when we get to right here, see if I can make this a little bit smaller. Okay, when we get to right here, it's going to start showing you where they swabbed everything. So on 11/17 is when they're saying they're doing this. You can see this little purple square box right here. You just match up the purple, right? So the only spots they've got swabbed on here in purple is what they're saying is around this button where they said they didn't swab it, and then around this strap where they say they didn't swab this because of fingerprints, but they've got it outlined like they did, area swab 1.1. Now, area swab 1.2 is the edges of the strap this way. So she swabbed the actual edges, not the front or the back. And then you go to, right here, area swab 1.3. Again, she did the edges, but this time of the blade portion around this way. It doesn't look like they ever even swabbed the thing here or here, according to what their report here says. Now on the back, you can see it says 0 toll positive. So it's showing a little bitty dot here, a little bitty dot here, and a little bitty dot here that you can probably only see if, you're spraying some kind of luminol on there, or you're showing a light that shows the stuff. Look, there's another one right here, 0 toll positive. So these are the 4 spots where she swabbed that entailed item 1.4. So these are 4 little blood spots that she swabbed for 1.4 on the back of this thing, which means Doesn't look like they ever swabbed any of this for anything. So that's what they swabbed on this thing. And they're just showing you right here a close-up. You can see this little spot here. They said there was a spot here. They said there was a spot, I think, where is it at? Right here and right here. So a little spot right here and then a little spot down here. All right. And then right here, they're showing that they have trace material collected on where the strap meets the actual sheath. But that isn't even listed in any of their swabs. So unless they're considering that part of 1.1, is that what they're saying they actually got the DNA from, this little spot right here? I don't know, because they're not more specific in their report. But it says they got some kind of trace material from right there. Side A not to scale. Okay, so they're saying they got some kind of material on the inside. So all the 1.1 must entail where they swabbed everything about these straps. All right, and then you got on the back, again, they're pointing to the little blood spots. And they got trace material on right here. It didn't even show that they had swabbed that earlier. They processed it for latent prints. None were developed. And it'll be returned to the submitting agency. So once they're all done, they return it to the submitting agency. And issue date, 11/19/2022. Then when we go to this report, they're going to be doing comparisons of items. You can see date accepted of evidence, 11/16 to the 18th. And what they're looking at here is taking swabs 1.1 through 1.4 of the sheath, DNA extracts from all of those, and then they're taking reference blood cards from Ethan Zana, Maddie Kaylee, and oral swabs from Jack Decor, reference DNA samples from Dylan and Bethany. And then they're also taking items, when they say all these items, these are blood swabs from areas of the King Road house and fingernails from the victims. And you can see their conclusions and interpretation. DNA analysis employing the polymerase chain reaction was used to generate a short tandem repeat profile from, looks like every one of these items, 1.1, 2, 3, and 4, and a portion of 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 18, and 19, which are all reference samples from the victims, Jack, Bethany, and Dylan. And here's what they came up with. The profile obtained from 1.1, which was the touch DNA on the sheath, was determined to be from an unknown male. And Ethan Chapin and Jack Decor are not the source of the DNA on this item. This DNA profile was entered into the combined DNA index system CODIS to be routinely searched against the database. The case agency will be notified in the event of a profile match. And then they go right to 1.4, which is all those little blood stains on the back. The DNA profile obtained from items 1.4 indicates a mixture of DNA with a major profile, which matches that obtained from the known reference sample of Kaylee Gonzalez. So they got a match on the back of the knife sheath with all those little blood samples. That's 1.4. They got a mixture. And that mixture, one of them matches Kaylee perfectly. So we know one of them is Kaylee for sure. Now they're going to go into likelihood ratios on determining the rest of it. Assuming a two-person mixture, this DNA profile is at least 757 septillion times more likely to be seen if it were the result of a mixture of DNA from Kaylee and an unrelated randomly selected individual than if it resulted from two unrelated individuals randomly selected from the general population. So what they're saying is that it's 757 septillion times more likely to be Kaylee and an unknown person than two unknown people. See, this is how they do their math on this DNA. When you see it's a It's a 5.7 octillion match to Koberger. No, they're saying 5.7 octillion match, more likely to be seen if it was Koberger than an unrelated random individual select from the population, which means absolutely nothing, as you can tell. Septillion, I believe, is a lot more than an octillion, and they can't even get a definitive answer on that. Then it goes to Matty Mogan is a potential contributor to the minor component of this mixture. Assuming a two-person mixture, this DNA profile is at least 48.6 quintillion times more likely to be seen if it were the result of a mixture of DNA from Matty Mogan and an unrelated randomly selected individual than if it was two unrelated individuals randomly selected from the general population. So, what they're saying, assuming a two-person mixture, they've already said it, Kaylee was one of them, but they're still going to go through and say, assuming a two-person mixture, it's more 48.6 quintillion times more likely to be seen if it's Matty and an unrelated person than two unrelated people altogether. Their math in this crap is so terrible. Ethan Chapin's and a Kernodle are excluded as contributors to this DNA mixture. The partial DNA profile obtained from item 1.2 indicates a mixture of DNA from 3 individuals, at least one of which is male. Due to the low-level results and limited data, no comparisons can be made. The partial DNA profile obtained from item 1.3 indicates a mixture of DNA from at least 2 individuals, at least one of which is male. Due to the low-level results and limited data, no comparisons can be made. Items 1.1 and 1.4 were consumed during testing. Items 1.1 and 1.4 were consumed during testing. That means you're not going to come up with items 1.1 and 1.4 ever again. However, DNA extract remains for these items. So 1.1 and 1.4 was all consumed, but they've still got the little extract mixture for these items. So they still got this extract that can be tested. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Now, items 1.2 and 1.3 and their DNA extracts were consumed during testing. Item 20 has been returned to the main laboratory evidence vault pending additional DNA analysis. All other items in the empty packaging for 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, and 1.4 have been returned to the main laboratory vault for return to the submitting agency. So everything's consumed, but they got a little bit of this extract left. I wonder how much DNA was actually in that extract, because that's been something of contention in our community for a long time. Well, we're going to find out for sure now. Which brings us to this, their final DNA quantitation sheet. DNA. For those of you that have studied this, you'll know what I'm referring to. Item Q1.1, when you go through their quantification and you get to nanograms per Yule final, you'll see that item Q1.1 was 0.1 nanograms per Yule. That's 100 picograms. And you can see, note, for any concentration samples, nanogram per Yule final reflects the new estimated concentration. So 100 picograms was their concentration in the solution. So you're telling me that with a 100 picogram final, you're going to do a standard STR test and then have enough of that solution left to send to Othram Labs and have them say, well, that was more than we ever get. You are out of your mind if you believe that. So since now we know exactly what was used to create these things, the PowerPlex Fusion Kit, it's not too hard to determine how many picograms that PowerPlex Fusion Kit needed to create that STR sample. And going to the National Library of Medicine, looking at the PowerPlex Fusion 6C system, we find The minimum amount of input DNA resulting in a full profile was 125 picograms. Now here's where it gets interesting. When we go to the chain of custody report for the knife sheath, you'll see item number 1, which is the K-bar sheath. It was brought into the lab on November 16th there in Meridian, Idaho. And whenever you see Sharon Arredondo in these, Sharon Arredondo is basically in charge of, bringing evidence in and logging it. Mickey Hall is also one that's going to be in charge of bringing in evidence in the lockers and logging it. And for the most part, Candy Floria is in charge of sending evidence out someplace, which you can see she's always listed whenever the evidence is being released. The people that actually are doing the work, that are actually real people in here that do forensic work, is Stephanie Wilt, Tim Walthall, as we've seen in those other reports that I showed you. And then occasionally you'll see Riley Nolan pop in these. But they received the actual sheath into the evidence on November 16th. So they just moved it around from evidence locker to evidence locker until Tim Walthall actually checks it out of evidence and begins processing it on November 17th, just like we just looked at in the report. And he took it out on November 17th and he kept it from 7:55:03 all the way until November 19th at 12:58:51. So that thing was being processed for those little spots on there outside of the evidence storage locker for dang near 2 days, which seems to be an inordinate amount of time to have that thing out. But that's for the sheath itself. Now, when we go down here to the actual swabs, and it starts with 1.1, well, they're actually listed separate than the sheath. So Stephanie Wilt apparently was assisting Tim Walthall, and she got the swabs taken on 11/17 and 11:59:05. Let's make sure that lines up over here. 11/17, yep, 7:55, he takes it out. Almost at noon, they're actually swabbing the first part of the sheath. And then they return it to storage, and then it goes back and forth between the storage handlers before it's released. 1.2, again, Stephanie Wilt, about the same time, does 1.2, the swabs of the handle portions. 1.3, swabs of the blade portions, and Stephanie Wilt does it again at that time. And then 1.4, the swabs of the stains on the back. Stephanie Wilt, and then it just goes back and forth before it's released. So Stephanie Wilt did all of the swabbing on this thing, and this is the chain of custody for that. And once they get it swabbed, you can see like 1.4 here, it went back to the evidence on 11/18 at 14:36. It went back to evidence on, well, see this one right here, according to them, they put it back in evidence on 11/17 at 14:49. 1.2 went back into evidence on 11/17 at 14:49. 1.1 went back into evidence on 11/17 at 14:49. So all the swabs went right back into evidence quick, but the actual sheath itself, once it was checked out, for some reason it was outside of evidence for 2 days, even after all the swabs have been resubmitted. Isn't that weird? So there's red flag number 1. The sheath was out of evidence for 2 days doing something with it, even though the swabs they took off of it all went back into evidence that same day. So what's going on with the sheath? while your swabs are in evidence that y'all consumed all of. Now, when we go down here to these extracts, items 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 for the sheath, again, we've got a chain of custody report. So, and it matches up pretty good. It was brought in by Wilt and put back into evidence on 1440 or 1117 at 1449, just like they said. And then it said it's pending DNA analysis. And then while it's pending DNA analysis, you can see on the 20th, Taylor Myshek takes it out of the analysis, I guess, or maybe this is when she started doing the analysis. Evidence storage. So she took it out on 11/20 at 12:32 and then put it right back in the storage at 12:41. And then Catherine Dace came at 11:21 at 10 a.m. and took it out of storage and then put it back after a little over an hour. And then the next day, Mickey Hall just transferred it to another freezer because that's what he does, is transfer stuff. But then on December the 9th, Sharon Arredondo is she's a evidence person, so she probably transferred it from the freezer into the evidence locker. So it only took her a minute. But then on that same day, Catherine Dace comes and checks it out on December 9th. And then it's not in any storage or anything until April the 6th. So when Catherine Dace removed this sample, what did she remove? The extracts from 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. So she removes all those extracts on December 9th from the storage locker. And then what happened to it until April the 6th, where it's checked back into evidence storage? This right here is broken in the chain of custody. But let me ask you, if these are the extracts, and this one only had 100 picograms, and it's already been used to create an STR sample, so there can't be much left. Taylor Myshek pulls it out on 11:20 for about 9 minutes and then puts it back in. Catherine Dace pulls it out on 11:21 for a little over an hour and then puts it back in. And then this is just evidence staff. Well, when did they supposedly send this to Othram? Do we have to look up the Othram records to find that? And then we go to this one, portion of DNA extract from item 1.1. Now this one just says portion of the extract. On 11/21, Catherine Dace takes it out of the lab for a little over an hour and a half and then brings it back to Mickey Hall to be stored in the lab at the freezer section. And then Candy Floria releases that portion to a submitting agency via a courier on 11/21. So this little portion of the extract, this must be what they're talking about sending to Othram on 11/21. There sure wasn't much of that portion left, was there? Well, and that lines up with the Blaker report. On November 21st, he traveled to Moscow to Meridian to drop off evidence. After getting evidence checked into the lab, assigned for a DNA profile, which had been generated by the ISP forensic lab. This profile was collected from a knife sheath. Well, according to what we just looked at, it wasn't a profile that was generated by the lab. It was just a little bitty portion of the mixture that included the 100 picograms in total. So you're expecting us to believe you found Brian Koberger through this investigative genetic genealogy with just a fraction of a portion of a 100 picogram total sample that had already been used to create a STR profile. And apparently there was still some of this solution left. So it should have been available for the defense to do their own testing on as well. So as we go through all of this, I've yet to see anything that shows any evidence against Brian Kohberger in all these lab reports. I guess the one that does show evidence against him is the one that's all blacked out, which are the allele matches on that DNA. But when you think about the quantities of what they had to work with, there wasn't enough. 100 picograms. I mean, we've argued about this for so long. By the time you create an STR sample, you don't even have enough with 100 picograms to even create a full sample. If you're using the solution and only using a portion of it, you're only using a portion of that 100 picograms, which means Othram used a portion of it, and it said they still had a little bit left after that. So this little 100 picograms went further than any other DNA known to man. And looking at where they got the DNA from and the methods in which they used, and nothing else matches Brian Kohberger, oh my God, this is absolutely insane. That's all I got to say. It's insane. And then when you look at the way they do their measurements, well, it's a 5.37 octillion to 1 match. Yeah, it's also 80 bazillion to 1 that there may be more than 2 contributors on the back of the knife sheath. Give me a break with those bogus numbers that convinces everybody of a narrative. This stuff is upsetting old Pop, but I'm going to keep going through them, and I'll bring you some more soon. Till then, please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.
Fly away. It's the first time of today.